Everybody, my name is Dennis Shao, organizer of the Bay Area Content Marketing Meetup. Thanks for being here. We were just talking before we began. We used to meet in the Bay Area in person before the pandemic. California is officially reopened as of June 15th, according to our governor. So for those of you who are local to the Bay Area, stay tuned. Maybe we will meet in person before the end of 2021. Today, I'm really excited on the topic, the best approach to buyer personas. I, as a content marketer, have used personas, but I have a feeling I wasn't using them effectively enough. So with us is Adrian Barnes. Adrian is a founder of Best Buyer Persona, joining us today from, I believe, Fort Worth, Texas. Yeah. Adrian, thanks for joining us, and take it away.
Thanks, Dennis. Yeah, so like Dennis said, I am the founder of Best Buyer Persona, and I discovered, much like what Dennis was just saying, I was a content marketer writing a lot for various different companies. And the first question I would ask my clients is, well, who is our persona? Who are we writing to? And usually the response would be some thinly veiled job title with like maybe an idea of a pain point. Okay, so then I'll go write pieces to them. And as a content strategist, it was very similar. Like, who are we writing to? Who's our best buyer? And they would give me like, well, she's 32. She loves the color red. Her name's Sally. She's in sales and she doesn't like her quotas. Now go create 12 pieces of content and an ebook and launch a campaign and some landing pages and an email strategy. And I'm like, that doesn't tell me anything. So I realized very quickly that these personas were kind of broken, that this wasn't the way we were going to actually appeal, learn about our customers, and there had to be a better way to go about it. So I went in and deeply gathered like a process, and that's what we're going to talk today about, is what is the process to create a better buyer persona. Right off the bat, so you probably know this, people aren't using their buyer personas. I did a survey with Audience, a tool of mine that I love to use, and we just asked agencies and in-house marketers, like, how are you creating buyer personas and are you using them? And we found that 77% of marketers create buyer personas, but they're what I'm calling a check the box marketing practice. And when I say that because they're not using them. So we know they're necessary. We know that, it's probably on some CEO's checklist of things that need to be done this year. But we found that 85% of marketers don't use their buyer personas when launching a new product, and then 77 don't use them when you're creating a new campaign. So basically, a lot of us are creating them, very few of us are using them. And so that's where there's a large disconnect in the buyer persona world, and then just knowing our customers. The number one question that I received from other marketers is, well, how do I make my buyer persona actionable? How do I make it relevant and useful? And the issue with that is we're trying to create something that's actionable and useful, but that was started and began as just a check the box practice, or as what I call a Mad Libs template. When you start with a template that is just basically generic and supposed to be for anybody, you end up filling in the blanks, and then all of the information you gather doesn't actually help you do what you're trying to do. So how do you make it actionable? How do you actually start with something that you can end up using? And so there's a disconnect between what marketers believe we're doing and what our customers say. This is probably, you may have seen this e-consultancy stat. I think it was like 2017, a little older than what I like to use, but I haven't seen an updated one. But more than 90% of marketers believe they understand and know their customers, but only an 80% of our customers are saying brands don't get me. Even my favorite brands don't seem to get me. So somewhere we think we're doing a really great job, but the customers don't. And I think that's all because we don't actually know who our customers are. And that's what a buyer persona is. The buyer persona is the document that's going to tell you and everyone in your organization, these are who our customers are. These are our best buyers. So you've probably heard it. Know your customers, know your customers. And really, as somebody who preaches that and is curious as to like the intricacies of knowing your customers, I wanted to figure out, what does it mean when someone says, know your customers? And so I really broke it down into 3 different parts. When we say know your customers, what we're saying is, you need to know who your customers are, how they self-identify. You need to know how do they behave, and you need to know why do they behave the way they do. So you have that self-identification, you have their behavior, and then you have their emotional social triggers as to why they say they behave that way. So that's really, there's three aspects to knowing your customers, and those are the three. And once you can answer those questions clearly and like confidently, you can say, yeah, we really do know our customers. So when I say, who are your customers? I want you to know, what are their experiences? What are their roles, rituals, relationships, responsibilities? That's what I call the 4 Rs. And I include that on every, especially B2B buyer persona. Their roles within the company, their rituals, their daily habits, their daily routines. What relationships do they have within their company? Who's their network? Who are people who influence them? Who do they report to? Who reports to them? Sometimes that can become a really important aspect of a B2B buyer persona, especially if sales funnels require, or you have like a buyer and then you have a user and you have, maybe it's a buyer by committee. You know, we know a lot of these B2B buyer personas and sales processes can be kind of complex if, you know, your CMO is the one that buys the product, but then there's a different level of users. So the relationship does really help to clarify that complexity. And then their responsibilities. What tasks do they have to complete in their job to be successful? What are their OKRs? What are their KPIs? How are they being measured and being deemed successful in their role? Knowing those things about your buyer persona is going to help you support them better, market to them with more empathy, and serve them better in your own product and in your marketing. So then the next is, how do they behave? So you want to understand what media they consume, what content do they create or engage with, what are their activities online, how are they behaving inside of your product, if it's an app or a software. Most of my clients are startups or B2B SaaS, so a lot of the way that I think and present this information is for software products. So how are they behaving inside of the app? How do they navigate the website or the tool, or however they're getting to your product? And then who are the people that would most likely influence them on social media or via podcasts? What are the all of the ways that you can reach them and be able to translate your message to them in a way that is welcoming and helpful? And then why do they behave the way they do? I have spent the last 2 weeks speaking to a whole bunch of different people who do buyer personas, some of the best, honestly. And usually most people leave out this step of the buyer persona. This, why do they behave the way they do? And this is the one that can kind of take a little bit longer to understand. You could get on a digital intelligence tool and figure out how they behave and who they are. You could scrape some social media stuff, understand how they've self-identified on social media. You could understand their heat maps. There's all different kinds of tools for you to see who they are and how they behave, but why they behave the way they do, you're only going to get that from the customer themselves. So this is where you go and you get those core buying triggers, their pain points, that emotional aspect of their purchasing process and decision, the pain points that they're experiencing along their buyer journey, what was going on inside of their mind in order to either make them switch from whatever their solution was beforehand to what they're using now, which is your tool. It really will, the why do they behave the way they do is one of the deepest layers of insights that you're going to be able to gather while you're doing your research for your buyer persona. This is the piece that, because most people leave it out, if you have it, you are one step ahead of the game, essentially. You're going to be able to market them with empathy and community. Both of those are really big terms right now in the marketing world. We're all trying to figure out, how do we reach these people? How do we create community with them? Because, you know, people are done with the spam email and the spray and pray kind of method. They really do want precise, precision marketing and solutions that are going to actually be really helpful to them. So the step-by-step buyer persona process, this is the process that I take for every buyer persona. Now you'll probably have and see templates of buyer personas out in the world. I do not think that you can create an actionable buyer persona if you start with a template. I think the way you start a really actionable and useful buyer persona is with internal questions and internal challenges. So what I do is I say, okay, I'm going to go around and I'm going to ask everybody in a department head across the teams, depending on how large the organization is, what do you still want to know about about our customers? What questions do you still have? So when you start there, you're going to end up with a lot more actionable information and insights. So the way I do it, it's the framework. So it's not the template, like I said, it really is a process that's going to lead you to a more actionable and insightful document in the end. So we start with interviewing the customers, surveying customers, then we transcribe and code interviews, digital analytics, and then buyer persona. And actually, which I should have another little circle here, we start with internal goals and challenges. We want to know, where is the company headed? What are we trying to achieve? What are the questions we still have about our customers? And then go into asking those questions to the customers. So when you interview your customers, the way I do it is I like to divide our segments of customers into 3 different segments, or who I interview into 3 different segments. I do the greatest fans, the meh, and your biggest enemies. And the reason I do this is because I don't want biased and leaning data and information, right? I want to make sure that we really do have a broad wealth of information that is going to get us to the true buyer persona, to who really our best customers are. And so when I interview greatest fans, they love the product. These are the people who've been around for probably years and years and years. They praise you on social media. They've left positive reviews. If you're trying to figure out where to find them, go to your review sites, go to your social media. They're probably in your company Slack channel. If you have a tight knit of customer and company Slack channel, those are probably the customers that are in that group. This group really does want to shout your praises and share about your tool because it's been so great and transformative to them. I like talking to them, especially for understanding who the best buyer is, because these are the kind of customers where you hear and you could say, man, if we can make 10,000 of those, we would be great. Like we would be in a sweet spot. So I want to figure out, what is it about these people that we are doing such a good job? Because between our greatest fans, our meh, and our biggest enemies, we don't change, right? Their needs change, their pain points change, who they are changes. That's what's different. So we're trying to figure out, how do we now approach more of the greatest fans? Your meh customers are like the ones who've been around for a while. They've never really complained. They went through their average customer life cycle, depending upon how you do sales. And they're just like, they're okay, they're average. These actually are the hardest ones to get on the phone because they're just meh. They're not very fired up and passionate about the product or the tool. They're just fine customers. So sometimes these guys need a little bit of an incentive. And then your biggest enemies. And this is the one, like Robin, I know we were talking earlier, where you start working with these startups and these founders. This is the one where I tell them, I'm going to have to talk to some of our biggest enemies for like palms start sweating. And they're just like, no, we don't need to bother those customers. Like that was a horrible experience. We let them go, or they completely churned and then they ranted about us on social media. But it's really important to talk to this group because what they let us know is, what did we do wrong? Where was the messaging off? Because at one point, they thought we would be a great solution for their problem. They thought our tool would do exactly what they wanted it to do. And then come to find out it didn't. So where was that inconsistency? Where did the messaging not land? What was it that happened that you thought we would be a good fit and then we turned out not to? And that's the kind of information that really does get into that, like, well, why are you behaving this way? What is it that you found valuable in our tool? How do you use our tool? So I like to really make sure that I get to talk to 10-ish out of each one of those segments is a really good start to kind of start hearing repetition in the answers. And so some interview tips that I have, basically when you're on a call, and I do believe it needs to be on a call, you want to ask for about 30 minutes of time. You want to be very clear when you're doing it, very transparent. Tell them, hey, we're trying to better our marketing. We want to serve you better. Would you mind getting on the phone with us for 30 minutes? Make sure that you listen. And so that sounds obvious, like, duh, we're on a phone call, we should listen. But actively listening is actually really, really hard on these types of interviews because it creates awkward silences and it creates these pauses and you're not filling in information like you would in an average chat, right? We're not just like shooting it and talking and da-da-da. It's really a matter of you're trying to ask a clear question, and then you're allowing the interviewee time to process and to think and to answer. So sometimes when you're in the middle of an interview, that sounds awkward and that is difficult to do. But the more practice you get at it, the better it is. And so you're really trying to find those subtle nuances, those emotional words, the words where they get in and actually tell you about like what they start storytelling their experience. You want to put them in the place and in the time where they started buying the product or where they started noticing that they had a pain point. If you can get them to start telling that story, it reveals a lot about why they purchased the thing, who they are, those core pain points and the motivating buying triggers that made them to switch and change their mind. Second, record. Always record. Don't forget to record. Record it to your local device, record it to the cloud. Any way that you can record it, the better. It is awful to go through a 30-minute interview with some amazing insights and you're not taking notes because you're trying to listen and then find out it didn't save to anywhere. So that's just a little, make sure you always record. Transcribe those interviews. So what we're looking for is really the insights and the words from your buyers. They are the experts in their experience. They are the experts in their journey. So when we are finished with our interviews, those transcripts become the core of our data, right? Like their words, their quotes really do help to shape who and what the buyer persona is. It tells us those 4 R's. It tells us the overview information. So having a transcript is really great. I use fireflies.ai. I don't have any, like, I'm not getting comped by that. I just like them. Rev is great. Zoom, if you pay for your Zoom, that works too pretty well. The only thing I've noticed about like Rev and Temi, some of the cheaper ones, is that if you're doing a lot of these at one time, you have a tendency to have to go back and edit and correct a lot. So that's just kind of a hint. If you don't want to have to spend the time doing that, spend a little bit more money, and the transcription services are good. And then a follow-up question for interviews that I really love to do that actually does help you get to the further level of insights and kind of really understanding like what else is going on. If someone says, I was just really frustrated with this, or that thing was kind of annoying. What I love to do is be like, oh, wow, that's really interesting. Can you tell me more about that? And then they start able to like explain more of their experience, explain more of their frustration or what they loved. So we have that emotion, but we're also getting to those underlying insights, those underlying motivators. And then the 5th tip for your interview is to validate their experience. If you are on the phone with somebody and they are talking about how awful this thing was, and sometimes we feel like we want to get in a position where we're like, oh, but actually, so you used that wrong. Let me tell you how to do it better. Or, well, that's not really how it's supposed to be used. Here's how you're supposed to do that. The second you begin to explain yourself or to validate your own experience, you've now changed it from insight interview into like a customer support, customer success type of call. So they are shutting down. You're no longer listening to them. You are teaching them. You're not gathering insights. So it's pretty much a wasted of a call. So if you're hearing something that gets to the point where you're like, oh, I want to defend this, like they did it wrong, they weren't using the tool right, or they don't understand the technology, that's when you kind of step back and be like, wow, that sounds really frustrating. Could you tell me more about that? And so what you're going to do is you're going to get more detail, more explanation. You're going to keep them centered on the phone call, allow it to continue on. And that's where really a lot of the really core and valuable insights can come from while you're on an interview. So the next step, after we've interviewed and we've figured out the words of our audience, we've kind of got a really good idea on a small scale of these pain points and the triggers and their buying motivations. That's when I create my survey. I've seen people who say they do it the opposite way. They'll do a survey first, then do the interviews. I like it to where the interviews help me create the surveys, and the surveys become a large scale validation of what I learned on the interviews. So keeping surveys as short as possible. If it needs to be 15 questions, fine. but make sure that when you are asking your people to fill out a survey, that they know what to expect, that they're able to get through it quickly, and that each question is necessary and valuable. If you're just like, well, it'd be kind of good to know, and it doesn't actually really pertain and going to help you learn something about their buying behaviors or who your best buyer is, then save that question for another day. This really needs to be super impactful and tight, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Keep it concise, keep it specific. You'll have better results that way. You'll have better conversion for your survey, and your data will be cleaner, essentially is what I'm trying to say. It's not going to be muddled with a lot of other information, and they won't skip questions as much. Invite them in every way you can promote it possible, and make sure that, usually when I do a survey, I'd like to see anywhere between 50 to 300 responses, depending upon the size of the company, depending upon their social size, their email list. But really what you're trying to do is further validate what you learned in the interviews. And then next we go on to transcribing and coding. And this is where really it becomes clear who that persona is. So we've got all of our transcribed data, we've got our survey data, and now we're going to take a step back and say, okay, we're going to review it, and we're going to try to find out what were the repeated phrases, what were those consistent problems and pain points that we heard over and over and over again, that by interview 22, you were like, oh yeah, I know what he's going to say. I've heard this before. Oh yeah, he has an issue with that thing like the same other 5 people do. Those are the things you're taking note of. So there's not really a wrong way to go about this. Use whatever tools and way that works best in your brain, but I'll share with you what works best in mine. I open a Google Doc form, and for each type of question I asked in the interview, I create a heading. And so, for instance, there have been buyer personas where we're looking at, we need to know what their tech stack is, or we need to know who they report to. We really need those relationships inside of the organization are more important than their own job title. Or maybe we really need to know their buyer journey very specifically. So I create headings, and then I'll have my Google Doc open and my transcripts open, and it's a cut and paste. So I'm going through the transcripts, trying to figure out what answers relate back to these topics that we were trying to discover, and I put the answers under the topic. And then once I finish with that, I have very concise data about each issue that we were looking for. Sometimes I like to copy and paste it and put it in a word cloud, just because visuals are fun, it's engaging. I add it to the slides in the buyer persona, and clients love that. And it makes it really easy and quick to see what exactly were the main pain points, or what were the main phrases used. I use an example. If you are selling tennis shoes, and you all over your website, on all of your call to actions, inside of your content marketing, anywhere you do any kind of marketing, you're saying, hey, our tennis shoes are great. Look at our tennis shoes. And then come to find out, your customers say sneakers. Like this whole time, they don't call them tennis shoes, they call them sneakers. And how simple of a switch that is to just use the terms and the words and the pain points of your own customers. But also it just allows them to think less, which is what we want. It's what we're trying to do, is make it easy as possible for them to choose to buy, right? And that's why when we can use those words in copy and content, over podcasts, ads, anywhere, it just makes that buying process easier, and our customers know we're speaking their language. Like, we are here to serve you. We're partners together, and we want to speak your language. So that's why I like the word clouds too. And then digital analysis. So this is the part that also gets left off. So there's either, most camps of people who do buyer personas do only digital analysis. They're only scraping the back of websites, or looking at, LinkedIn data, Twitter data, email, all of those things, those really technical things that can be done using tools like SparkToro or Meltwater or Audience or BrandWatch. And then they don't do any customer conversations and surveys, or sometimes people only do surveys. And what I'm saying is the best approach is that 3-pronged approach. You need to do the interviews with the customers, we need to do the surveys with the customers, and we need to do the digital analysis. If you can do all 3 approaches and really dig in deep, your data is going to be much richer. You're going to know exactly, you're going to answer those 3 questions. You're going to know how they behave, why they behave, and who they claim to be, who they self-identify as, who they are. For digital analysis, I use SparkToro, I use Audience, and I use Meltwater for social listening. And those 3 tools together really give me a great idea of like, who do they self-proclaim to be, who is in their network. Audience uses IBM Watson data, so it's really cool to kind of get in and like further look at segmentation and how they're related to people and how people are connected and all different kinds of personality traits. And then SparkToro helps me identify, if I needed to market to them, and I'm looking for different approaches. Oh, they listen to this podcast quite a bit, so maybe I should advertise, or maybe we should pitch that podcast, or all of the different options for PR and marketing you can think of. That really will help you to reach those people in that way. So like I said, to build the best approach to building a better buyer persona is that 3-pronged approach where you're doing digital intelligence analysis, interviewing your customers, getting those one-to-one conversations, and then surveys. And then if you really want to know your customers, you're going to know who they are, how they behave, and why they behave the way they do. And once you have all the answers and the clarity on those 3 questions by using those 3 approaches, you will come out with a buyer persona that's not only accurate, but that's usable, that you can now take to your marketing team and say, hey, this is who our buyers are. These are who our buyers are. These are their pain points. This is the job that they've hired us to do. What kind of campaigns do we need to create? You can go to product and say, product, this is who our people are. This is what they're looking for. Customer success. I really do say that these types of buyer personas should not just sit on your CMO's Google slide. These need to be shared with the entire company. This kind of information should impact customer success and product development and future growth goals and KPIs and all of it, because it's such valuable information about who we are marketing to. And if we know who and have a better idea of knowing our customers, then the rest of it just kind of falls into place. Let's see. And that is the end of my slides. And I think, Dennis, 30 minutes as well.
Yes, it was. Thanks so much, Adrienne.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, we have some questions in the chat. For those of you who asked a question in the chat, you can feel free to unmute and ask it. Otherwise, I will grab the question from the chat. Let's see. Okay. So Nicole started with a question. As far as interviewing, do we ever interview non-customers?
Yeah. So there can be a point if you want to do an anti-persona, like some people say, where they interview non-customers. What I find challenging with non-customers is they don't know their buyer journey yet. They don't know their buying triggers yet. They don't know their core motivations and their core pain points yet. So if I'm really looking to understand those people, I don't do non-customers because they haven't made the journey. I like to do customers who just converted. Maybe they've only been customers for 3 months. And then even those customers, that kind of falls in that meh category. And then the customers who've been around for a very long time, because that helps us get a good range. But for a buyer persona, I don't yet do non-customers.
Very good. Does anyone want to chime in with their own question? Otherwise, I'm going to be grabbing them out of the chat. So feel free, as I'm looking, to ask.
Well, what if you want to move into a new market segment where you don't have any customers, but you want to get into that segment? That seems like you have to interview non-customers.
Yes. So that's kind of why I said not yet. So when I'm working with a startup who they're like, yeah, we don't have anybody yet, but we're trying to figure out who we are. What I do is I basically do the digital analysis intelligence, where I really try to figure out, okay, so this is our product. We're looking at who we think, talking to founders, talking to like the core developers. Who do we think this tool is for? Okay, let's go out. And this is where when startups really do need to praise being scrappy and fast. So we're going to do a little bit of the process. We're going to interview these people that maybe we can find and incentivize who meet this idea of who we think is a good customer. Then we're going to test a little bit. And then we're going to, okay, that wasn't quite it. So now we're going to do something else. When I hear startups say like they've done their buyer persona process and then like check it's done, for an early stage startup who's trying to really gather that product market fit and figure out where we're at, this is an iterative constant process where we're really trying to gather those first users. Okay, now we've got a couple and we need to be on the phone with them quite a bit. When we have one really good customer, let's get on the phone. Let's do some really good customer support, especially high up with the founder, what's going on, have those kinds of user interviews as early on as you possibly can. And if you don't have any, start using that digital intelligence analysis and social listening, where you're going in, maybe there's a competitor and you're like, who is the community that are, like the people that are using the competitor? Who are they? What are their issues? Okay, we're going to kind of make a guess. We're going to make an estimate that this is going to be similar to our audience. Let's start working and trying and seeing it. So it really is about gathering as much assumptions and kind of a hypothesis that you can, and then testing that hypothesis out the further along you go. Where it's really good to do your solid buyer persona process, where you can say, yeah, we did it and we're super confident in it, is probably at year 5 to 6, I found, with startups at least, where they feel like, okay, we know who we are a little bit better. We know who these people are. We've got a few hundred customers. Now we can really delve in and do a deep buyer persona process. But before that, it's just kind of it's consistently being done, if that makes sense.
Iterating, right? Quicker and iterative and trying to drill in who that is.
Yeah. And that's a startup's like secret magic, right? Like, why not lean into that? Let's just, if you're a startup, be fast, be scrappy, and just lean into that strength, because that's your superpower right now.
And Adrienne, we have a question from Matthew, which is basically the same question Todd just asked. Like, what if you don't have customers yet? The one additional thing he asked is, how many interviews should you do if you don't have customers yet?
Oh, how many if you don't have customers yet? I would do as many as you can. It's going to be hard to get someone on the phone who isn't using a product. I'm actually in a process and a project like this right now. So it's cold calling. They don't know who we are. They don't have any affiliation to us. And we're trying to get people on the phone. I'm not even going to lie, it's a hard step at that process. That's why I say, maybe before you have customers, lean more towards the digital analysis, lean more towards the social listening, lean more towards like trying to gather your competitors' audience, because in a survey, like a survey out on social or in Facebook groups, LinkedIn groups, wherever your people might be, that's going to get you some quicker data to go against. Whereas, when you actually have customers, they're a little bit more, they have some buy-in, essentially. I've even tried incentivizing people who are non-customers when you're coming in cold, and it's just a challenge. It really is a challenge. So with those kinds of things in mind, if you can get 1 or 2 people on the phone, that's great. Like, just take as many as you can. For an established company, when we're doing interviews, if you can talk to, usually I say you're looking for that repetition in answers. When you've asked a question and you're starting to hear the same answer 2 or 3 times, you're reaching a good spot. For me and for buyer personas, that tends to take about 20 interviews, which is a lot, but it really does. Before 20, you're not quite clear. Things are still you're still trying to figure out your way. Once you hit about 15 to 18, you start thinking like, okay, I'm starting to recognize these patterns and these behaviors. And by 20, you're probably pretty good off.
So speaking of the digital analysis and like social listening, if you could use the example of the company that sells tennis shoes, I'm curious, like, where do you start? How do you get started to figure out what people are saying on social, for instance?
Yeah, so I specifically use Meltwater, so I can speak to that. What I do is I go into my tool and I basically apply tags and I search key phrases. You can search, if you don't have a tool yet, maybe you're like, look, we're working with like tiny budgets here. So Twitter hashtags, Instagram hashtags, groups, go in where you think your people are, search those hashtags, search the chats, and just start reading, start trying to figure out what are questions they keep asking. Reddit is a wealth of knowledge for this, going into Reddit and really Everything has a subreddit nowadays, and that's where people go and are free with their questions and their problems and then their advice. So that's basically my approach to social listening. Either I'm using my tool and applying tags, and it's scraping Twitter or Instagram for me, and I'm reading through and highlighting. I'm responding to those people too, because while I'm there, I might as well work to create community as much as I can. And then also gathering those insights and figuring out like, what are their main problems? What are they struggling with? It helps you to identify future trends as well. You can start to see shifts that will happen in the market before they actually do happen, because you're so closely tied into what your real customers and real buyers are saying and questions that they're asking.
Very good. Michael asks if you've ever used Google Discussions.
I haven't. What is Google
Discussions?
Yeah,
I think I've heard of that offering, but I've never used it. Michael, do you want to tell us some more? Have you used it?
Yeah, it's a tool on the Google search under the More button that it searches through chats and message boards and things like that.
Well,
So
I will
it's a
be
cheap
now.
way to kind of do that.
Write that one down. Google Discussions. I like
You're
it.
saying, Michael, is it part of like the search engine results page? Like you can, or is it something else?
Yeah. It's a free thing on the search engine page.
Okay. Interesting.
Well, thanks for sharing.
And Adrian, Tom asks if do you have an example you can show of a buyer persona?
I do have an example. If you want to go to bestbuyerpersona.com, contact us and say, I'd like to see an example, I can have that one emailed to you. Like I said, it's not a template because I don't really believe templates are going to get you to the best spot, but it is an example of the things that I must include. Each client, each time we sit down with a customer, there's always something new. There's always some customization. Like I said, sometimes it's that relationship hierarchy that gets really delved into, or the tech stack, or the buyer journey. But I do have an example I'd be happy to share. Go to bestbuyerpersona.com and contact us. And my contact form has I want to see the example, and I'll send that to you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And speaking of your business, Adrian, what is the typical scope of an engagement comprise of?
Yeah. So because I do this in such a thorough way, I'm definitely not competing with the people who get 6 buyer personas done in a day. I'm not in that realm of people like agencies where it's got to be like super fast. This process, I'm trying to whittle it down, to be honest, but it takes 6 weeks. And most of that is the interviews with the customers. That's about a month to get, 20 people on the phone, meet their schedules, things like that. But the digital intelligence analysis, the survey, and my coding of the data, and essentially putting together the buyer persona, that takes about 2 weeks. So it's a 6 weeks process. We do a lot of onboarding where I'm talking to executives and leaders, whoever that is in your company, and just saying, like, what do we not understand? Where are the gaps in our knowledge? What do we need to know? Where are things going wrong? Where is there some slowdown in the sales process or in our marketing? Where are things not clicking right? Asking just a lot of questions so that I can get a good insight on where the company stands and where we need to, or the information we need to learn. Then we do customer development, where we create the questions that we're going to ask our customers, how do we ask questions in the best way? What's going to get us the most valuable insight? And then from there, it's basically scheduling out the interviews and hosting those, and then putting it all together. At the end of the day, right now, my pricing is public and on my website. It's $10,650 for one buyer persona, but that is a starter price, and it's only going to go up from there. But definitely, it's an intense process that makes sure that by the time we're done, you have something that you can actually use and not just like a template.
Excellent. I see Rich Schwerin is unmuted. Rich, you have a question?
I have a question. First of all, thank you, Adrian, for your presentation and for hosting Dennis. So, Adrian, have you experienced with larger clients in that you're not coming in to engage from personas from sort of a scratch perspective, but perhaps larger corporations where they have a bunch of persona work, it's siloed, it's disparate, it's, this group has this persona, this, any reconciliation projects there? any insights that you could offer?
Yes, I do actually. And this is something that I think it is almost like an awakening in the industry right now. People are like, whoa, wait, this is really complex. We kind of need to like simplify this and have a better understanding. So I have different levels of engagements where I can do like a 1-hour workshop consultation where I did one recently where they showed me their persona. I asked a bunch of questions beforehand and they were really clear, and we were able to say like, what's the best way for you to narrow this down? Why do you like, because I'm coming in with fresh eyes, so I can see it and I can say, what does this line mean? How come you have 5 people over here? What does that do for you? How is Sally helping you? So I really kind of poke holes and ask, is this important? Does this actually, who are you marketing to? Or what piece of marketing, what piece of sales was able to accomplish because you knew this information? I am very efficient when it comes to the buyer personas. I want every line of information to be able to actually inform something, whether it be a product, whether it be, a content marketing campaign, a campaign of any sort. So I also come along and kind of consult at a higher level. So I can walk you through the process saying like, okay, here's what we do, or here's how you should ask your questions. And then they go off and do it. And then we come back and say, okay, here's the data. This is how we'll go through it. But yeah, it definitely can get complicated and complex quickly if you've been around for a long time. If you have a complex hiring or sales cycle, enterprise SaaS definitely deals with this issue where, like I've said, we've got buyers, but buyers aren't users, and then users have a network. It really is important. And that's why I use a jobs to be done method, really to kind of focus the entire buyer persona. Because if we can understand the job that the best buyer is trying to accomplish, that eliminates a lot of unwanted and wasteful persona information.
Yeah, all right, very good. Thank you. Also appreciate your shout out to SparkToro. I was in early beta, in the early beta with Rand Fishkin and Dennis. That's one we should get on the radar for one of these Zooms at noon. Somebody from SparkToro to come give a demo and talk about it. It's an amazingly powerful audience insight as to who you're trying to reach and where are they and what social signals are they sending, so what are they talking about and where are they talking about it. So.
Absolutely. Rand is great. He's actually, I'm doing a buyer persona summit in July, and Rand joined me to talk about buyer personas and SparkToro's kind of unique approach. So that would be great.
Cool. All right. Thanks.
Thank you.
Is that, Adrian, you're hosting one or you're speaking at the summit?
I am putting together a summit. I am
Excellent.
running a summit. Yes. Buyer Persona Summit, July 12th through the 14th.
Okay. So we could find, is there a website?
It is, there will be a website next week. It is getting put together.
Okay. We'll share it out when it's ready.
Thanks, Dennis. I appreciate that.
Sure. Okay, other questions?
No,
I recognize a bunch of
I've got a comment.
Todd?
Yeah, so I looked up, I'd never heard of Google Discussions, so I looked it up, and it's a Chrome plugin that you can easily add, and then there in your search results, it'll add a button, up in the top where it says all news images. It'll add discussions. Looks to be pretty useful.
Excellent.
I like that tip. And Rich, it sounded like you were asking a question for a friend there.
Say again.
Oh, it sounded like you were asking a question for a friend.
Well, misery loves company, right? These meetups are always cathartic in that having worked in large, giant corporations, there's often siloed persona work, probably millions of dollars invested in it. Yes. And then it's the reconciliation of, no, we have the right personas. No, we do. Or they're too granular. Hey, we've got 18 personas. No, you don't.
Yeah.
You don't, because I'm not going to produce 18 bespoke pieces of content because those aren't 18 people. So yeah.
Did y'all see the tweet from the guy at PayPal this last week? I don't know if anybody saw it, but he basically shared that he spent $1 million on PayPal's buyer personas and they were trash at the end of it, because he's like, we started with segmentation. We had great data from all kinds of places. We created these personas. And then by the time we were done, we looked at the information and it was like, none of this informs anything that we want to do. Like, we know that our customers have dogs over cats, or that they, wake up at 6 a.m., or that they live in the suburbs and they mostly drive Hondas, but that we now cannot create anything. And so I thought, man, what a lesson learned. $1 million. So yeah, you're not far off, Rich, at all.
That sounds
Yeah,
like the Steve Jobs logo for like $4 million.
Yeah, exactly.
For PayPal, that was pretty cheap. It was probably a cheap lesson learned.
Oh, probably. That's probably true. It feels like a lot, though. I'm used to working with like those 1 to 5 million AAR software companies. So $1 million is.
Yeah, that'd be
You should put
disastrous.
Put PayPal on your ABM account list for sure.
Yeah, there we go. Thanks.
And of course, Rich has already found the tweet. He's very fast finding tweets.
There's
Yes.
always a tweet, right?
It was good. I mean, it was a good lesson learned. He has a product at the end that's a jobs template, which, I think is funny that it's also a template. But anyways, I digress. It was a hard lesson learned, I think. But it goes back to, he didn't start with what are the questions inside of our company, what kind of questions do we need to ask? What challenges do we need to solve? He started with how do we segment these people? So that's why it ended up with, oh, great, we know a whole bunch of information about people, but we can't do anything with it.
All right, any other questions, comments? We'll give it a few seconds in case you're trying to unmute yourself.
That was great, Adrian. Thanks.
Thank you. I
There's your
appreciate
comment.
it.
Very helpful.
Thanks. Anytime. And if you have any questions, or if you're like in the middle of a project, feel free. I'm at Adrian Nicole on Twitter, bestbuyerpersona.com. That goes straight to my inbox. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to help.
Thanks so much, Adrian.
Yeah.
All right, everyone, take care, and we'll see you at the next meetup.
Bye, y'all.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.